So, part of the delay on this particular video, even though you guys shouldn't actually see a delay from your end, is the fact that I had to spend the last 3 days compiling information on what happened during the next session. I wanted to do this whole session within a single video, which is what I'll be doing. Now, there's a reason I call this the longest day. This is the point in time at which I decided to go ahead and change the format of how we were doing things on the forums. And instead of doing per event or per session or whatever, each thread was a day. So this was February the 13th, I believe it was. Hang on, I can actually double check that, because I wanted to look up something else as well while I'm here. So the point is, a lot happened on this day. A lot. Now, actually, if you've been keeping track at all, which I don't blame you if you haven't, we're not actually at the 13th yet. We're actually on the 12th. Ah, yep, there it is, 13th. So I'll be glossing over the 12th very quickly, because the 12th is mostly travel time. There's an important event there I need to mention, though. And then the 13th, where everything in the world happened. In fact, the 13th is actually spread out across 3 separate threads. And it's a total of something along the lines of 79 pages of posts. So yeah, that's why I had to go back. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. And because of the somewhat chaotic nature of the role-playing, I wanted to make sure that, I got everything in relative order. So, let's start off right at the beginning. I'm going to be glossing over a lot of the most excellent, I might add, role-playing that happened during this thing, because I've got a lot of ground to cover. But I just want to mention that, a lot of this was actually role-played out. I'm just trying to cover this from, from basically a story perspective. So, the group, after their interrogation of the individual they call the Warden, who is a representative of a group known as the 11, with all the information they gather from him, they go ahead and decide to head east because they're close to the coast. Upon getting close there, they notice that there's some kind of strange outcropping in the rocks, and they go ahead and try to investigate it. Snarg actually goes to investigate it, and he finds within an entire, fairly well-hidden base of some sorts. Looks like a dock for naval ships to dock, and sailing ships specifically. He doesn't think he is seen. He actually was. But as he's goes back, he goes to the rest of the group, and they spend quite a while debating what to do. That's going to become a trend over the next several sessions. Until finally they notice a ship starts to approach. A rather well-equipped, well-armed-looking ship, all things considered. Probably belonging to some bandits or something like that, because it's either that or this is actually a mercenary ship, or, of course, a military vessel. As it approaches, they get a pretty good look at it, because it stops right there and aims its cannons at them. Now, these are, I believe I decided they were Mark 5s. Real quick, cannons, standard, mundane, non-magical cannons rank from Mark 1, which is, standard civilian stuff, to Mark 7, which is the highest possible quality that they've developed so far for the military. So even seeing Mark 5s on anything that isn't official military is pretty significant. And they're all aiming right at them, ready to blow them to hell and back if they move so much as twitch in the wrong way. And they insist on, a representative being sent over to the ship so they can discuss why they shouldn't shoot them to death. So the group decides to send Tabron over, who promptly fails a lot of his diplomacies and nearly causes them to simply decide to kill them all on the spot, but after a while manages to just barely recover and agree to pay these individuals, who happen to be the Black Brine bandits, in order to get them passage northward to Holtberg, which is quite a bit of a trip. It's going to take most of the evening in order just to sail up there. So, after some negotiating, they manage to get on board, and the crew and the party interact for a little bit. They learn a little bit about the Black Brine. Oh, one other thing. They also get some fake identification to allow them to get in, because the way Holtberg works is getting out is actually relatively easy. You don't really need much to leave Holtberg under most circumstances, but if you're trying to enter Holtberg from any avenue, whether it be ground or naval, you generally have to have some kind of paperwork to allow you to do so. You may ask why the last group didn't have much issue with that, and if you actually paid attention, the fairy who was with them, Ariana, basically managed to get them past the paperwork side of things. But this time the party has nothing going for them, so they go ahead and pay a forger to give them forged passports. Now, the way forged passports work is they're only guaranteed to work once. Anytime after that, it's a risk of them being discovered as fake, so at the very least this will get them in once. So they all get their fake identities, and they learn a little bit about the Black Brine. First and foremost, the Black Brine are one of the more famous bandit groups in the whole continent. Actually, they pretty much run the entire East Coast, and kind of have claimed most of the Eastern Ocean as their territory for all intents and purposes. Of course, they do some stuff, on land as well, but they're primarily naval. They also are well known for having a good reputation. And then again, I mentioned these are bandits, not pirates. For those of you who don't know the difference, very briefly, bandits are people who are illegal, criminals, whatever, but they will not go over the line. And there's actually an official legal, I guess, definition of pirates, which is anybody who does go over the line, people who kill or go over the line, anything horrible, basically. Anyone who is a pirate is basically branded as does not deserve to continue existing. And it's not just allowed, but it is encouraged that everyone, including other bandits, go and try to kill those pirates as quickly as possible. So pirates don't tend to actually survive all that long within this setting, at least not yet. Moving on. As they talk with the Black Brine, Zeiss tries to play politician and start recruiting these people because he has these big dreams of restarting the undermarket. I've mentioned in brief before that the undermarket has kind of crumbled. Not a lot of information about it, but they do know that the undermarket basically has disintegrated pretty much ever since war was declared. And there's a lot of... They ask, what do you think? Why do you think that happened? And the general response is the obvious thing. Well, the undermarket was run from Stonehold. Everybody knows that. So, war was declared against Stonehold and the undermarket collapsed. It makes sense, right? And that's just what they kind of go with. Don't really look into that anymore. But Zeiss really has these big, pie-in-the-sky visions. So he tries to get the Black Brine to agree to work with him, despite the fact that he has nothing that could, in any way, shape, or form, convince them to work with him. So he tries trading information. He tries to convince them based on all the horrible things they've seen and the conspiracies they've encountered. He believes that's what they're going up against. I spent a while writing a little story here that I'm going to share for you word for word because this is very important and gets across the point rather clearly. They're talking to the first mate on the ship they're in. Pardon me. Which I don't remember the name of. But we're just going to go ahead and read the section. Screw it. Some years ago, I was a boatswain on the Coral Hook, one of our finer ships at the time. We had a difficult mission, a brutal one, but we were ready for it. All the show admirals wanted was some intelligence on the Tumaroc coastline, along the dry reach zone. Any intelligence at all, any information that we could get him. His face slowly hardening into a grimace as he talks. We had it planned out careful-like, waited for fog, crept in under a single mast, lookouts in the nest. The moment we spotted anything, we were to stop, send out rowboats, and after that, swimmers. We were trying to stay as hidden as we could. He pauses, and you notice several of the other crewmen have paused in their work. Those with hats have taken them off and laid them upon their chests. We were sailing under Captain Tolmead himself. Good chap, smart folk. Always kept his hat on well. When our first Crow scout spotted what looked like a Tumaroc ship right on the horizon, a few miles away, we ready to pull in rope and drop anchor. A few of us heard the sound. It was the strangest sound, like cannon fire, but with no fire, just a echo on the deep. But told you he was quick. Started barking orders immediate. Ordered full canvas. Started turning the ship around. Probably saved his life in doing so. A few seconds later, a shot ripped right through half of the stern. He pauses and turns to stare at Zeiss. Mind ye, our ships don't look like much, but this is Glendon oak, reinforced with steel and magically augmented. It's about as good as it gets for those like us. But whatever they shot us with tore through it like tinder. Now, Tolmead already had a plan. Abandoned ship, ordered it right to, grabbed a few people and flung them overboard, and he steered the ship himself towards the Tumaroc. He was hoping they'd just see the ship, not the boats. Old Captain Tolmead died that day the best way there is to die, saving his crew and going down with his ship. But I will never forget that sensation. You know what that feeling was, rogue? He turns and stares, and without waiting long for an answer, replies, powerlessness. I felt utter and complete powerlessness. I felt like there was nothing I could do because I was staring at an enemy that destroyed us without ever even letting us see them, and they did so with no remorse and no hesitation and no basic decency of law or persons. They saw something that wasn't them, and they obliterated it. I'm telling you this, little rogues. You understand just what kind of threats are out there, what kind of risk you're taking. You want to get your way out there, get stronger, work your way up, that's fine. Make sure you keep your head on straight, or you'll be dead in the water to an enemy you never even saw. So, that little nugget of joy out of the way, the group finishes their trip northwards. Takes a bit of a rest. It doesn't actually take all day. It's just, a few hours visit. Hang on just a second. The Errant Venture. That's what I called the ship. Here we go. Holtberg section. I've already described Holtberg. In fact, I did a whole video just talking about Holtberg. So I'm not going to rehash myself too much there, but I did go into a little bit of detail about Holtberg and talking about, the shipyards, the districts. So I'm going to go over really quick just the kind of districts there are, just really briefly here. There's the docks are huge. In fact, they're stupidly huge to the point where it's kind of unsafe to even be there. The northern docks is where the common, commercial, and personal ships go. Has, of course, warehouses and whatnot. The southern docks is actually the middle dock, kind of a misnomer there. But that's where the large companies, Magitech haulers, that kind of thing. It's pretty much just voted towards commercial, high-scale commercial ships and whatnot. And then there's the military docks, which is the actual southern docks. That's, of course, completely off limits in general and very heavily patrolled. There's the Royal District up here. This is where the nobility resides. It has the High Council, the governmental offices, and it's actually quite large. It's a fairly large chunk of the city itself. At the moment, the Royal District is actually under a complete lockdown. In normal circumstances, people are allowed to come and go and actually are encouraged to peruse the streets and visit with representatives and officials based on, the whole nobility thing that they've got going and the trying to be amiable with the populace despite having an aristocracy thing. But at the moment, it is completely locked off. There's the warehouse district, which is for storage on a macroscopic level, and actually goes underground several levels. It's the only part of the city that doesn't reach up, like with all the skyscrapers. It goes down. Huge section. The commerce district, which is pretty much the very center of the entire city. Lots of towers and skyscrapers, where many major companies across the whole continent have their headquarters here, or at least a large office. Hundreds upon hundreds of types of goods of every type and commonality for sale, from a woman at the apple stall to an elite Olthois-spun scarf shop on the 40th floor of one of the towers. It's basically all here. And the commerce district, of course, is fully 24/7 for obvious reasons. The hub that isn't present in Holtberg is actually in the commerce district. The Sid shipyards, pretty obvious. It's actually a whole district by itself. It is the second largest airship construction facility in the entire world. That's actually where the Leviathan was built piece by piece and then assembled in midair. The shipyard works exclusively for Illuvian military interests. The base district, which is also kind of obvious, that's where the military housing is for family members of the military and several of the more mundane facilities like groceries and facilities, that kind of thing. The low commons, that's the quote-unquote cheap residential section. Of course, it's still more expensive than most other cities' areas are to live, but the majority of the people who actually live in Holtberg live here. And there are the occasional commercial buildings, but it's pretty much, a giant swath of residential. The high commons, which is the medium residential area, it's not nearly as large as the low commons, but still the size of a city by itself. Huge portions of this area are eaten up by large apartment complexes, which are usually rented out at a building level by the major companies and organizations that maintain for the facilities within Holtberg. It's actually not much more expensive to live here than in the low commons, but you get less room or privacy for fairly obvious reasons. And then there's the High Wealth District, which is the smallest district in Holtberg of all the districts, and that's where the elite, ultra-rich, and much of the nobility actually live. While the concept of nobility is kind of out of date as far as lineage and heredity and whatnot like that, the sad truth is most people who would be considered blooded are in fact still rich regardless of their blood status, and so they do everything they can to continue their little private games one with another. It is also worth noting that most of the government officials also live here. Then there's the gates, which aren't actually districts per se, but there's north, west, and south gates. They're the only parts that actually lead out from the wall. And that's really all I have to say about that. They are huge, as befitting the size of a city like this. They're wide enough. They're about the width of the length of a football field, give or take. And of course, the Tyrannus airship docks, which is actually outside the city walls, over to the west here. It is the public and commercial airship dock for Holtberg, and where anybody who is not involved with the military can utilize those facilities, or have an airship constructed or whatever. There's several other things you can do out there. And of course, then there's the railway connection, which is also outside the city walls for obvious reason. All right, let's close this down. So, Holtberg. Now, the party does a billion things here, so I'm just going to kind of go down the list, but I wanted to come across two things really quick, two very generic notes. One, and yes, there's an in-universe, in-lore, makes sense reason for this, which I will not be giving you, but this is the point at which the party is informed that if they choose to do so, they have the option to purchase pets. And when I say pets, of course, I mean Pokemon. Now, these Pokemon have absolutely no combat facility whatsoever. They can't be trained or bred or anything like that, but they are, like I said, pets. And several of the party members do decide to go ahead and pick up a few. Let's see here, I actually made a list of that. Zeiss gets an Eevee, named Rainbow. Z goes ahead and gets a little Mew, named Sumomo, of all things. Tabrin gets a Glaceon, named Hinata, and Sethos gets a Ditto, named Taku. And they have quite a bit of fun with that. It was actually rather fun to roleplay that. The other thing they get is everyone in the universe is terribly terrified about two things. One, of course, is the war. That should be the duh. Actually, I'm sorry, three things. One is the war. I shouldn't even have to add anything about that. The busiest city and the largest city in the whole world is terrified about the war. Duh. The second thing is the Royal District, as I mentioned, is locked off completely. And the reason why is the council has been in session for 4 days now, as of this point. And that's all they know. That's all anybody knows. But there are actual soldiers keeping guard at all the gates and all the walkways leading into the Royal District, and ensuring that no one can enter under any circumstances or leave. Now, that's the other important thing. Nobody has actually left the Royal District in the last several days, too. It is under complete lockdown. So a lot of people are a little bit understandably screwed up about that. And the last thing is there are these posters all over the place asking for anybody who has any information on trying to capture warmongers. See, apparently, according to the order of summoners, a elite group of individuals was working for Stonehold, or for the aggressors, in order to try and elicit war between Sho and Nevere, right? None of this probably sounds suspicious or out of the ordinary if you've been paying attention to the campaign yet. What may sound interesting is the people who are on the list. A Olthoi named Kazrinthka, a fairy named Hanuel, a elf named Zeiss, another elf named Coulson, and two strange creatures named Rory and Hagaid. No one else, by the way. Every individual on that list, if you're not paying attention, is a member of the party. Of course, it's also not the entire party. In fact, it's only like a third of the party at this point. So the party doesn't actually know exactly what to make of that, but most of them immediately react violently and angrily about the order selling them out for whatever reason. Oh, excuse me. It also means they need to start keeping a low profile because they're wanted criminals continent-wide. Now, one of the other things I want to mention here is this is when Hagaide went ahead and bowed out of the campaign. He didn't want to play anymore. It's fine. I understand. I'm a terrible GM. I understand. But he wanted to go and do his own thing. Now, usually when someone does that, this is actually the fifth time this has happened at this point in time. And when someone actually bows out like that, I go ahead and just give them the option to NPC themselves. So Higide, the character, still exists within the setting, but he's no longer being played by anyone. And what he ends up doing is he goes down to the docks and is not heard from again. We'll get back to that someday, maybe. That's up to the party. Oh, goodness, I have so much information to cover. Let's just go down the list as I wrote it. Okay, so Snarg, our Knoll friend, decides he wants to sneak into the Royal District to find out what's going on, which is one of the most suicidal plans the party's ever come up with. Now, this right here is my D20. Now, what I mean by that is I purchased this D20 when I was 11. Okay? Well, okay, no, I didn't. No, I did, actually. I paid for this with my own money. I paid for this the set that this D20 comes from with my own money when I was 11. So as you might imagine, this is kind of old. Now, this dice, I told Snarg, I'm like, look, okay, if this is a 20, no other modifiers. I basically told him what you're asking for is so insane and so unlikely to happen that the only way I will let it happen is if it is on a 20. No skills involved. So I rolled it and it was a 20. So he sneaks into the Royal District, manages to make his way through there, and infiltrates a local post area, which is sending letters to and fro within the Royal District. Manages to hide it, disguise himself as one of those, grabs the letters, and rushes off towards the actual main, I forget what I called it, but it's the building where the council meets and where people can, view them making decisions, where the Lord of Holtberg tends to keep I can't remember the term, not recess, holds court, basically, so, etc., etc. He nearly gets caught twice. Both times I told him again, if this rolls a 20, you succeed. So 2 20s later, he makes his way there, tries to sneak his way in, and then tries to lie bald-faced to someone to get in. Again, I'm like, okay, this is the last time I'm giving you this option. If this is a 20, you know where this is going. He rolls another 20, the 4th 20 in a row now. I think he was fixing my dice. Manages he lies bald-faced to the guard, who doesn't believe him, actually. But the guard goes ahead and says, look, I'll let you go in, but you're not back out in 20 minutes, then I'm coming in after you with weapons. And Snarg's like, okay. So he rushes in, and what he finds is all the High Queen herself, all of the earls, all of the lords of all the provinces that make up Alluvia, and pretty much the entire upper echelon of the military, and a lone goblin. Now, he finds out that this goblin is of the Death Touch clan, and his name is Gavis. Gavis of Death Touch. Now, I described this scene very particularly to him. Gavis was speaking to them as though he was their equal or superior. He was not bowing and scraping, he was not showing any particular respect owed the people who are in charge of the largest and most powerful country in the world. He was treating them like they were less than him, and they were accepting it and acknowledging it. And Snarg doesn't get much information out of this meeting specifically, because he only stays for like 20 minutes before he decides, okay, I need to get out of here. But what he does learn is that Gavis is proposing some kind of radical new solution to the, and in his own words, economic problems of Alluvia, and trying to make it work in such a manner that things would no longer be above board, I believe is the actual phrase I used there. So then Snarg, scurries his way out of the area, almost gets caught again. This time he didn't have to roll a 20, he just had to accept it. Oh, no, I'm just leaving. And the guard decides not to kill him on the spot. And he gets the heck out of there, gets the heck out of Dodge, gets his equipment, which he actually left outside the Royal District, so he'd be more disguised, and then flees for his life. Meanwhile, the group learns, by the way, this kind of ties in with the Higide thing. Higide? They learned that ever since the first ship that brought Firnasil and Flux and Higide to Alluvia, ships between the two have been very regular. Alluvia has actually formed a regular trade agreement on a national level with the Visay and LaSalle, which is now functioning as one unit thanks to the houses uniting, right? I know we haven't touched on Vassan Lascelles in a while, so forgive me. But those ships, as of a little under a week ago, have just stopped showing up entirely. And a lot of people are starting to mutter and worry about what's going on. And there's all sorts of thoughts about what could be happening and whatnot. But the bottom line is they're concerned. And there's actually quite a few human refugees who are here who had been taking passage to get off Vassan Lascelles because of the whole threat of it, disintegrating from under them. They do learn that apparently that disintegration was stopped. This is the first time the party learns that Vassan Lascelles was actually saved, and it is still a coherent concrete island. But a lot of the refugees are now left basically living within storehouses and warehouses within the docks area, usually the North Docks, and they don't really know what to do with that. I'm kind of skipping ahead here because a lot of other events happen, but I figured I'd mention it here. Rory actually finds out that some of those people are actually members of his family from Vassan Lascelles. Not all the members. Only a few of the members actually decided to go ahead and get on the ship and, flee. And they're not 100% sure where everyone else is in the family. They're probably still on Vassan Lascelles, or, something worse happened to them. But his mother is here, not his father, but his mother's here. I don't remember exactly who. I decided at the time. I believe it was his mother, sister, brother, and I think that's it, actually. One of the sisters and one of the brothers is here, not the rest. And they have been trying to make some kind of a living for themselves, working in the most mundane ways possible, literally starting at the absolute bottom of the rung as far as a dock worker. So Rory is happy to see his family, upset to not see the rest of his family, and has a little bit more motivation to get some kind of establishment going so he can help his family out now. I'm also going to mention something because I'm not sure if I mentioned it last time, because in the last video I was very, very tired and having trouble maintaining a coherent thought. But the Sotiris that the group encountered agreed to go ahead and deliver Andre, the Desolate child, and several letters, and then immediately return to let the group know and return with respond letters. That was actually 2 days ago as of now, from all that's happened since then. And it comes to the party's attention that the Sotiris has simply vanished, which is also something that worries the party significantly. Now, at about this time, towards the beginning of the day, Zeiss ends up meeting with someone, an elf, very nondescript elf, who is really, really good at hiding, lying, stealing, that kind of thing. Zeiss goes ahead and arranges a meeting with him and says, what do you want? And the gentleman says he wants to recruit him. And his terms are very simple. You do everything we tell you, always, and you get paid. And that's basically his terms. Now, Zeiss decides to go ahead and turn this down. But Zeiss also asks, why me? To which the gentleman responds very honestly, at least he imagines, because you're the easiest to manipulate. Now, Zeiss doesn't like this so much, so like I said, he turns it down and goes his separate ways. Not long after, the elf in question sells him out. He's not actually 100% sure the elf sold him out. He can probably say it, though, because as he's heading back towards the inn where he had purchased some rooms, there are several soldiers waiting for him, waiting for the warmonger or Zeiss, who are, ambush him and take him away to be imprisoned. And as he's being taken away, he notices the elf just kind of gives a little sardonic wave of, yep, see ya. So, Zeiss is now in prison. Now here's the funny part. Because this happens outside of the inn he was at, none of the rest of the party actually knows this in character. So, God, so much happened on this day. Fearness and the okay, so the party is having their powwow in the inn. They've actually stayed at like 5 different inns. It was actually kind of interesting trying to keep everything track of during this whole day. And this session actually took like a week and a half in real time across this one day. But anyways, everyone's staying everywhere. But several of them managed to get together into one place and start discussing what's going on. And this is the very first time Fearness mentions the Red Cloak. She's not Red Cloak, if you're paying attention, and remember, was the big villain, the one who killed all of her people back on Vassan Lascelles and on Mary Lascelles. And that's basically all they know about him, although she's pretty sure he's a scion, but she doesn't actually mention that part yet. Now, this is the first time this is actually given to the rest of the party in character, and she mentions why she is so adamant on her quest to deal with him, and so forth and so on. Right about this time as well, you see, way back in the second adventure, when they were dealing with the cave and the abomination within, they in the treasure trove they also found a key, which is about this big, which was a mirror. It was solid mirror on all sides in all directions. And about this time, they start to experiment with the key. Now, a couple things come of this. First of all, the people who use it, I believe Zeiss was included in this, basically go brain dead for a bit. And then when they come back, they talk about all these things they saw, like a great tower and like an active volcano and all sorts of weird stuff. Or I'm sorry, an inactive volcano, all sorts of strange things like that. And the tower that they mentioned seeing was this massive mirrored tower, just like the key is. So they decide to experiment with it and try to do some magical studies, and that causes it to explode. Now, the key is undamaged, but the room they're in is not. The room they're in is trashed, and it actually gathers a lot of attention, and as I mentioned, these people are wanted criminals at the highest level that is possible. They literally barely managed to talk their way out of this situation. Through some very, very fast talking, Coulson and, Z, quickly insists that he was the one responsible for this. He was just doing magical experiments. He's so sorry. Blah 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 blah. Lots of diplomacy and deception rolls, and finally agrees to pay the price for destroying this inn, which is actually quite significant. It was several hundred gold. And Coulson comes by and immediately goes with the lion, and he agrees to pay the rest because they literally didn't have that much money on them to pay for this. But somehow they managed to talk their way out of this situation. I actually could not believe that. I figured they'd all be ending up in prison. And actually, I was planning on that, believe it or not. But they managed to somehow sneak their way out and just go, okay, oh god, oh god, oh god. At about this time, Z decides he needs to go and get some disguises. So Z, who's been to Holtberg before and dealt with the Undermarket before, knows that there's a woman, a very elderly gnomish woman, who is very good at making things, weaving things for, illegal activities. So Z goes to meet her, and the woman is named Millie of Greatgear. I only mention this because this is the first archweaver the party has actually encountered, and she'll be mentioned a few times in the future as well. Nothing really special there. She basically agrees to do these disguises at an extraordinary discount in exchange for a very simple favor. Millie explains to Z that due to the Undermarket's... I'm going to go ahead and refer to it as an assassination, but because the Undermarket just is not functioning anymore. The Undermarket has collapsed. There we go. That's the word I want to use. Due to the Undermarket's collapsed, everything is going poorly, and too many people are grasping at straws and trying to make things work when they didn't and isn't. And if things aren't fixed soon, it's going to be bad for everyone, including her, because that's how she made her fortune, and she needs to, take care of her massive family. So that's the favor Millie asks of Z. Go fix the Undermarket. So Z's like, okay. Meanwhile, Ashakel, our troll friend, really wants to learn how to read. So he, through his examinations, finds a dwarf who's named Bartholomew of Ironforge, although most of his friends just call him Bob. So Bob, the dwarf, says, I'll go ahead and teach you how to read for... He mentions a fairly large sum of gold. I think it was like 400 gold. And Ashakel's like, no, and he leaves. And the guy's like, wait, no, please, I'm desperate. What he finds out is Bob is behind on his payments for a local university. There's universities within Holtberg. Of course there are. It's a gargantuan city. It's the metropolis. And Bob, well, put it simply, about a week ago, Bob went ahead and took several of his ancestral mugs of the clan Ironforge and put them up into ad hoc, or not ad hoc, what's the term I'm thinking of? I had the right term at the time. He used them as, not leverage, collateral in order to get a loan from the Undermarket. And so he gave them the cups, and they were going to examine them and then get back to him with the 400 gold he needs in order to pay for it, yada yada. And then he'd work, then he'd work out the 400 gold and pay them back and get his mugs back, right? All very above board. The problem is the Undermarket just self-disintegrated, and so the person who he was dealing with has vanished. He has no idea what's happened to him, and he can't get a hold of anybody now, and so he's out his gold and his mugs. So Ashakel says, I'll go ahead and get you the mugs. I can't help you with the gold, though. I don't have that much gold. And Bob's like, all right, we'll see what works. So Ashakel has an invested reason to check out the undermarket now, or what's left of it. So does Z, actually. So those two people are dealing with that. Tabrin, our lycanthrope friend, actually received a letter. This was actually some time ago. I kind of skipped over this because it wasn't relevant till now. From his house, his Darakost house, giving him orders to try and help stabilize the region, and if he fails, to recall, basically. So Tabrin has his own interest in dealing with this. So Tabrin and Ashikel go try to infiltrate the undermarket, successfully find their way into the Veil, is what it's called, the Hidden Veil. Now, I described this very well and in detail at the time. I'm just going to kind of give you a summary. The Hidden Veil is infrastructure throughout most of the commercial district, of the entire commercial district of Holtberg, that is built into it in such a way that it's very obvious that it was built there when the commercial district was built. Now, if you're not catching the significance of that, that means the undermarket has been around as long as Holtberg has. It was there when they built the city. It's been built into the infrastructure since forever. And I don't just mean the physical infrastructure. The party is starting to get the picture more and more that the undermarket has been the foundation of the economy for most of the country, and probably the world, basically since forever, since the country has existed. So they're starting to get more and more why this whole undermarket collapse thing is a bad thing. And later on, they'll start to theorize that maybe this was done deliberately, because it's awfully convenient timing when you think about it. While there, they encounter someone who calls himself the Third. He is Ogren. He is a dwarf. He doesn't give his clan name, and he offers to. They basically try to convince him, that we're trying to rebuild the undermarket and blah 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 blah. And Ogren, after significant discussions and debates, says, "I'll agree to work with you if you go and get rid of the First." Now, the First, who's the guy in charge of the local chapter, let's call the Holtberg chapter of the undermarket, has lately been pushing for more violent protection rackets, macketeering, that kind of thing. The kind of stuff that doesn't work, in other words. The kind of stuff that will bring attention of the actual military and officials and whatnot, and doesn't really make a lot of money anyways, and just gives the wrong impression across. So the Third wants the First, and his whole thing stopped. So, Tabern's like, "You want us to kill him?" The Third says, "I didn't say anything about that." And so Tabard and Ashikel leave. Ashikel does actually... I'm going to go ahead and... This event occurs over the course of most of the day, but Ashikel does actually manage to learn exactly where those mugs are, or rather where they would be, or rather where they should be, checks out several of the antique shops in the area, and manages to find the one that actually has them, purchases them from them, and returns them to Bob, who in his gratitude gives Bob an item he found in an archaeological dig. Bob's a archaeologist and a bit of a treasure hunter of his own right. The item he is given is actually a steel reliquary. For those of you who don't know what that means, and indeed the party didn't for some time, not until the very, very end of the day, when they finally got around to analyzing it because they were busy with everything else. A reliquary of any type is a magical construct, box type thing, chest, whatever, that when interacting with a magical key of some sort will produce random items from it, equipment, gear, that kind of a thing. It's another holdover from the previous society, the ancients, and obviously they don't have a key, so it's just a fancy box. They could, of course, sell it if they want to, but they decided to hold on to it for good reason. So, scroll down a bit. Okay, so about this time, and by about this time I mean sometime during the day, the group goes to the second inn, having blown up the first one. And they didn't blow up the whole inn, just most of the rooms. But anyways, they go to the second inn, and a bounty hunter nearly catches them, like right after they enter. However, the bounty hunter, after they fail to catch him, is in fact caught by Bagan, the lycanthrope of the Lady Airfall, who Firnasil and Flux encountered some time ago. Now, Bagan gathers them together, and as they're talking, most of the rest of the party, who's off doing their various errands, comes together. So it reaches the point where pretty much the entire party, minus Zeiss, of course, is all here talking with Bagan, and there's quite a bit of an info dump. I'm going to just kind of brush over the specifics and just kind of mention the relatives. First of all, Bagan tells them that the Order specifically sold their group out in specifics for some reason. Well, he's not entirely certain where, because it sounds like political suicide, but The main purpose from his understanding is the Order did it in order to distance themselves from the volatile situation of the war. In other words, the Order was trying to maintain neutrality and offered them up as a sacrifice to do so. He also mentions that due to some very vague information they have, it is very likely that the Tumarok have actually invaded Vasayan-Lascelles, and that is why nobody has actually been on Vasayan-Lascelles. The Tumarok have conquered it and are now occupying it. At this point, Firnasil is very confused because she insists the Tumarok are nice, simple farming folk. She doesn't understand what's going on. If you'll remember, those were the kind of people she encountered on Mary-Lascelles, but moving on. Also, this is about when the party decides that it decides to question him about the Tumarok a little bit, and they basically don't get anything in response because nobody really knows much about them. But he does give them details, like for example, the dry reach zone, the expanse of about the size of larger than Texas, that the dry reach that the Tumarok conquered. They conquered in 3 days. And there were actually no survivors from any of the conflicts there. There are no people who actually survived that invasion. Only people who were not involved in the fighting because the Tumarok decided to just stop. And anyone who has tried to scout out the dry reach zone ever since has never been heard from again. That includes airship incursions, by the way. So, he also mentions a organization that his lady, the Lady Airfall, has been putting together and mastering. She's loosely referring to it as the Coordinate. Now, the Coordinate is purely and solely devoted towards one goal: stopping Gerlin. This is the first time his name is mentioned ever. Gerlin is the gentleman that we've been referring to as Red Cloak this entire time. He is the information they gain at this point is that he is a tremendously powerful ancient being who has been around for at least the last 3 centuries, and he is dedicated towards the goal of some kind of horrible evil, either the conquest of or destruction of the world. They're not sure. But Airfall, the Lady Airfall, is genuinely terrified of this man, and so she has been focusing all of her resources and effort purely to get this situation going so that they can contest him. Bagan asks on behalf of the Lady Airfall if the party will join the Coordinate, loosely, of course. There's no paperwork or anything like that, and the party, at some length, does decide to agree. At which point Bagan leaves. Oh, by the way, one other thing Bagan gets across. He also mentions that Zeiss has been imprisoned. This is the first time the party finally learns that Zeiss was thrown in prison earlier. So, after a great deal of thought, they realize that their immediate plans have to be getting Zeiss out of prison, working on this whole undermarket issue, and then investigating some of the nearby towns outside of Holtberg. Coulson has a personal reason for checking out one of the towns nearby. Janwall is the name of the town, and that's because his little business that he's been running on the side, which has actually been doing quite well, stopped having supplies come from Janwall, and his friend Vaughn, who's actually running the place, doesn't know why, so either way, he needs to check into that. So they decide to split up a little bit. Z and Guido go ahead in order to check out the undermarket. Shortly thereafter, most of the rest of the party will also go to the undermarket in order to deal with the first that I mentioned earlier. Thackus is actually his name. And I forget his clan name off the top of my head. Shadow Song, I believe. An elf. And the 3 people who will be left behind are Rory, Hanuel, and Coulson, because these 3 people are the ones who can't disguise themselves, who are wanted, still on the wanted posters. And everybody else is either not in the party anymore, or capable of disguising themselves. So, a couple things happen. We'll cover the things that happened back in the inn first. Those 3 people that I mentioned, Coulson, Hanuel, and Rory, are just kind of hanging out, playing solitaire, actually, when the key, which happens to still be with them, the mirror key, speaks to them. And it speaks with a voice that I described as honeyed silken honey, excuse me. And it offers to go ahead and assist them in freeing Zeiss. And when they ask why, it says, well, this key and that which it can do has the power to translate, transport, teleport, without regard towards magical barriers, like there's one around the prison. So you could use this, get to Zeiss, and then it'll be free. And all it asks in return is that you help it to save the desolates that it has under its care within the Mirror Tower, the poor, helpless desolates who really need, assistance in this matter. Now, the Rory and Coulson, I'm sorry, Rory and Hanuel are both somewhat suspicious. Coulson fails his will save, I'll just say that flat out, and so he starts acting really weird, and he starts really agreeing with this key, and he thinks this is a great idea, and we need to do this right now. Give me the key, Hanuel. Give me the key, Hanuel, and he actually pulls out his sword. And Rory ends up pulling out his axe, and the two very nearly come to blows. And it's not until this point in time, by happenstance, Coulson gets a second will save, manages to succeed at that one, and snaps out of it. At which point they agree that the key is just being screwed up, and they try to get rid of it, stop using it or whatever. And then the voice changes completely, rather than being this honeyed, silken voice of doom. Turns into this gravelly, horrible voice, which tells them that anything they do is simply irrelevant anyways, and all it has to do is kill them all, and then it can move on with its plans. And, what the? Hang on just a second. Where is... Anyways. After a while, they try to debate ways to get rid of this key, but ultimately they don't come up with anything. They're just terrified of it. So and the amount of Madry within it means trying to deweave or destroy it would probably result in a massive backlash of energy. So they're not even going to try to do that. Now, on top of that, they also... Put simply, the party, this group, decides that they're going to go ahead and basically wrap the key up in cloth, and then a bag, and then another bag, and try to just not deal with it for now. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, Z and Guido went ahead, and probably a good thing too, because the very first thing they do is they encounter a group that is about to ambush the party. And when they ask why, the ambush party says, well, we heard they're going to assassinate the first, and we're not down with that, And Z and Guido manage to convince them that they are also members of the Undermarket, or what's left of it. At this point, this particular group, the Holtberg chapter, is calling themselves the Talons, actually. And after convincing them so, they infiltrate the group, basically, and wait in ambush with them. The only thing they manage to do is convince the group not to attack in ambush rather than to talk in ambush. So, when the rest of the party shows up, they see this ambush group, which also consists of Z and Guido. And they're like, And at length, they manage to convince, basically the ambush group manages to convince the party group and vice versa, not to fight each other, but that they just want to talk, and so we're gonna all go together to the second, who's basically the one who most of the orders come through, and we'll talk to him, and then we'll figure out if we can solve this whole situation. So they all go, and they meet the second. The second is a big ol' ogre who has no clan name. And I mention that because, as I've mentioned in my whole discussion of the setting, and clan names are hugely important within setting, and so anytime a character does not have a clan name, there's a very strong reason for that. They never actually ask about this gentleman's reason, but I just pointed out for you, the viewer's sake. He calls himself Bonebreaker. He is an ogre. Tall, strong, very well built, very well mannered, and very well spoken. He is obviously incredibly intelligent the way he presents himself. He is actively practicing his pugilism, and doing a bit of a workout as he goes, And they try to talk to him, but the problem is they decide to lie to him. And he can tell. He's really good at that. And so he gets more and more angry until finally he decides it's going to come down to a fight. So he literally picks up his desk and flings it at the party, and then goes after Tabron to beat the crap out of him. Now, I mentioned this now. I'm going to pause for just a second here. It's hilarious to me because one of the things, every now and again I lose all self-confidence, also known as every day of my life, and I go to the party and I say, what do you think of my GMing so far? And one of the most common complaints I heard, one of the times I did this later, after this session, after several sessions after this actually, was not enough combat, not enough conflict. I mentioned that because if you're paying attention, not only here but a lot of previous times, the party has gone way out of their way to successfully avoid combat. So they are actually in initiative at this point in time when they manage to somehow succeed on several rolls and talk Bonebreaker down back to the point where they could just negotiate with him. So they completely dodge the boss fight here and interact with Bonebreaker. And as they're talking with him, they insist on seeing the first, and he just kind of keeps completely ignoring them, like there is no, okay, what do you want to talk about? Well, we want to talk to the first. Okay, well, what are you going to tell him? well, we were going to tell him this and this. Okay, well, what do you think of that? And he would respond to them as though he was the first, if you get where I'm going with this. And so the party assumes that there is no first, that Bonebreaker is the person who actually runs the show, and there's just a, the first, the Thackus individual is someone he just kind of made up in order to be kind of a scapegoat kind of a thing. Now, the party gets to the point where they discuss things with Bonebreaker, and they decide they're going to go ahead and try to make a new organization to replace the Undermarket. Now, this is a huge undertaking, and given the fractured nature of how things are now, they learned that all they really can have any claim on right now is the group that is within Holtberg itself, which they decide to go ahead and take nominal control over. The party does, and they start referring to as the Exchange, which will be a thing that'll come in quite a bit in the future. Now, one of the other things I feel like mentioning here is that they basically give day-to-day management of the Exchange over to Bonebreaker while they handle several of the other things. I actually spent a fairly large amount of time setting up a huge amount of background info for what is effectively a mini-game within the campaign for them to manage agents and operatives and trade routes and that kind of thing as they're doing this. Part of the party members loved it, part of them hated it, whatever. It's kind of on hold right now because of events that have been happening within the campaign, but suffice it to say, it's a whole little separate thing that they've been working on here. So, now that they've gotten this worked out, they start working on a couple things. So, first of all, Bonebreaker has an idea for managing to get them out of this whole wanted for warmongering criminals thing. So, he sends the 3 party members who... Oh, I'm sorry, by the way, at this point in time, Coulson, Rory, and Hanuel have been pulled into the Veil as well to discuss things here. They spend quite a while doing something I absolutely love doing, and I always have. Planning out a mission, basically. And now that sounds kind of weird and dorky and stupid, I'm sure. But to give you a very modern example in a video game, imagine if you actually were the person. Imagine if you weren't just picking A or B and then choosing crew members in GTA for those heists. Imagine if you actually were planning all of the steps along the way and actually were finding out all the information and doing it all yourself. It's something that I used to do back in Cyberpunk a lot, for example. The planning out the mission kind of a thing. It's always been enjoyable for me. So the party spent quite a while getting information and making choices and planning out how they were going to break Zeiss out. They had a lot of ideas. And as they were working, Bonebreaker decided he had an option to... they pursued one option that Bonebreaker offered in order to try and get rid of that warmongering crime. So those 3 I mentioned, the 3 wanted people, he gives a coded letter and sends them off to a specific area over in the northern docks. Meanwhile, the rest of the party finally decides on what the plan they're going to do on, okay? They are reasonably certain that sometime this evening, because of the fact that there is a hearing, a public hearing that's going to be for Zeiss tomorrow, they know, based on policy, on the way Olivia does things, that there will be a private hearing before that. That means it's very likely they're going to move Zeiss from the prison to the Royal District, where the courthouses are, tonight. And they don't know how much time. They literally had no figures. This is just sometime in the evening. It's already like 10 at the evening at this point in time. So they need to get moving. So a lot of time-sensitive decisions were made. They decide they're going to go and try and catch Zeiss in transit. Now they assume that the route he's going to be taking is along the... Well, okay. They have a lot of options for where they could lie and wait, but they decide to wait on the most heavily trafficked, common street that leads pretty much straight from the military district, where the prison is, over here to the Royal District. And the reasoning is that it's more likely that they will use, given the political problems... I'm sorry, I didn't actually mention this. One of the other things they learn as they're going here is that Zeiss's capture was very well publicized, but it was... And I mention this because people probably assumed that would actually raise morale. It actually lowered it, because the Illuvians started getting more and more upset about the idea that an Illuvian citizen, Zeiss is an elf after all, was going to be imprisoned and tried for crimes that happened in other countries. And due to the nature of how secretive everything has been, basically people are very unhappy about this. So in order to keep things quiet, it's more likely that they won't use this heavily guarded convoy or anything like that, that they'll just quietly try to slip him along this main route straight there and get it over with, right? So they assume he's going to take that route. They assume it's going to be something very mundane and normal, and they assume that they'll just wait on this thing. Some of the party will be here. Fear and Seal will actually be right outside like, if this is the military district and here's the road, she's going to be like right here, waiting and constantly mentally scanning to try and find any sign of Zeiss in, anywhere nearby. She's got like a range basically for a radar on this. Several other members of the party are going to be with her, just kind of hanging out in the area, acting normal, casual. Further down the line are going to be several party members who are also just kind of chilling and engaging in alcoholic activities so that they can make a fuss about the whole, we need to, Alluvian justice for Alluvian citizens, and we need to make sure, that kind of thing. They're going to make a little bit of a riot happen, or at the very least a crowd. And that's their plan. Now, I'll go into how the plan goes in a moment, but I want to talk about Rory, Coulson, and Hanuel first. They go off on their little side trip, and they use the secret coded letter, and they go to the secret hiding place, which is magically contained. And once they get in there, after a little bit, a woman comes out, very well dressed, very elaborate uniform, tight cut, and by tight cut I mean, like a military style uniform. Coulson, of course, who was born in Holtberg and has lived here most of his life, recognizes this as the lady, what's her name? Hang on. The Lady Delicia Lightmane, of Lightmane, I should say. That is to say, the actual lord of the entire Holtberg province. And, of course, the woman in charge of most of the things. So the Lady Lightmane agrees to meet with them, talks with them for a bit about what they want and what they're doing here, and learns that they are building the exchange in order to fill in the gaps that the undermarket left. Now, she likes the way they talk about this, because apparently... and Snark does share his information on this, so the party's aware of this. But apparently, she and several other members of the Alluvian nobility had recently been approached on the idea of completely, just removing all of the debris of the undermarket and building something new in its place. Probably what the goblin Gavis was talking about. But what they want to do is take the undermarket and build it anew, build it stronger within, and she likes that idea better. She also likes the idea more of actually keeping Alluvian jobs in Alluvian territories. So, after some consideration, she agrees to go ahead and nominally work and liaise with this exchange. And the only thing that the party asks for in exchange immediately is to have their names cleared of this whole warmongering business. So... after a while, they manage to concur with her. She leaves to go to her business, and the rest of the party, Coulson, Rory, and Hanuel, start heading back towards the group. Meanwhile, Firnasil is on watch, waiting for anything, and she detects Zeiss. Now, this is actually fun, because I was GMing for Zeiss in private messages while I was GMing for the rest of the party. Zeiss was actually put into some kind of a very, very tired status. He wasn't actually asleep, but he was, and bound at the hand, bound at the wrists, bound at the knees, and bound at the ankles as well. And he was lifted up, and imagine a basic wagon with a covered top, and it back flops open. What they did was they had this wagon filled with supplies and goods and whatnot, just like all the other wagons in the area. Put him in there on top of the supplies and whatnot, and then piled in some supplies as well after him, so that he's basically in this coffin of supplies within the wagon, and then sealed it up. So Firnasil manages to find him, thanks to her mental powers, just barely, by the way, very close thing. And so she's like, okay, there he is. So the group in the head starts to make their, just make their noise, make their commotion, and they're actually rather successful at that. At one point, they actually end up throwing alcohol on the ground. How upset this is. This situation is screwed up. And several soldiers come out to, investigate and try to make some kind of peace going on. And after a while, Firnasil uses one of her psionic powers in order to blanket the area in magical darkness. She's done this before, actually, if you recall. They rush into the rough area where they think the wagon is, because she's only got a vague idea of where he is, and they find out that this whole area is actually, there's several wagons, all pretty much identical. This one just happens to be one of the ones that was traveling. After a couple of false starts, they find the correct wagon, open it up, dig their way through the supplies, get Zeiss out, and they're like, okay, we got Zeiss, now we need to get out of here. Now, one other thing that's interesting is, if you remember some time ago, I don't think I actually mentioned this, one of the pieces of treasure the party received was an exit materia. Now, the way materia works in this setting, very, very briefly, is it gives you the ability or stat bonus to do something, and you have so many slots within your soul, and then you put it in with your soul, and then it gives you access to it, right? This happens to give the ability to exit 8 people, uh, to somewhere safe. Now, the way exit works, I really got to explain this, is exit will take you and anyone you consider within, an ally within up to the number of people you can transit, to anywhere safe. Now, when I say anywhere, I mean basically, literally anywhere. It's probably going to be someplace relatively nearby, but there are a lot of options. Now, when they started talking about using the exit materia, I took an aside on my own time and made a point. Actually, it was a D6. I made 6 locations that they could show up at. One of those was actually within the Hidden Veil, next to Bonebreaker's office. That was actually the one on the 6. I'm not going to tell you what the other 5 are for reasons that should be fairly obvious, but the problem is they have too many people to use the exit material immediately. Here's where things go southwards. So far, this has actually been pretty successful. The magical darkness is cleared, and all of a sudden a bunch of search... Oh, by the way, this is like at 11 at night, so it's pretty dark. The darkness is cleared, a bunch of searchlights show up, and they realize that there is a destroyer-class airship hovering right there, which has been on silent mode up until now, or stealth mode if you prefer. Now, for those of you who are not aware, in brief, when it comes to military airships, there's the corvette class, which is, your basics, the destroyer class, and then the frigate class. Frigates are the big ones. I really should be like this. Frigates, destroyers, corvettes. Even a corvette is quite a problem, but a destroyer is a huge deal, and for one very big reason, which I'll get into in a moment. Now, the party is frantically trying to figure out what to do, and they're kind of spread out, and there's a lot of chaos going on because the little riot they started is still happening, and the soldiers are still rushing around. And the thing that really precipitates everything going south is the destroyer sends out a pulse. Now, I haven't really described this before, but any extensive military-designed airship has the ability to have this sort of magical radar, which is incredibly detailed, almost perfectly detailed. I actually described it to the point where, for example, if you see an airship overhead and it sends out a pulse, it could tell how much air you're breathing right now. It could tell you, just about everything, just about any detail, down to any level of detail of everything within a certain radius. This is why it's important that it's a destroyer, because a destroyer has that technology and has that built into it. So it sends out a pulse, and that means it knows exactly where they all are and exactly where everything is, and it knows exactly what's happening right now, perfectly. And several members of the party realize this because they know about how this works, and they immediately are like, "Oh God!" As if they weren't already terrified of the fact that a military airship just appeared over their heads. So now, who was it? I actually made a point of it. Tabrin grabs as many people as he can and uses the exit materia, and by luck, it lands on a 1, and they end up in Bonebreaker's office. Now here's the funny part. This is a big reveal, and was a big reveal for the party, too. Z has been a party member. Well, Z has been a part of the story ever since they joined the Order, basically, way back in the Nevaria Desert. And Z has actually been played by my sister ever since I handed the reins over to her when Kazrinthka was killed, and because I was playing Z prior to that. And so Z has been a member of the party for some time at this point, at least in terms of real life terms. This is like a month-ish. So Z grabs Firnasil, Zeiss, and Snarg, and teleports, somehow, of her own volition, or his own volition, or whatever, zoom, over to Bonebreaker's office to get to someplace safe. Now, the reason this is significant, and every member of the party other than Firnasil is aware of this in character, is that one of the most distinctive traits that a non-magically inclined person who can't see the lack of elemental energy within a Desolate... okay. The easiest way to determine if someone is a Desolate is by seeing their lack of elemental affinity. Either if you're a fairy, or if you have enough knowledge elements in order to do so, basically. But the other way is Desolates all have this ability they call translation, which is very visually distinctive. There's no mistaking it. There's this big black sphere that opens up, and then it kind of winks out as they teleport to wherever it is they go. And not many people know many of the limitations or how that works, but both Snarg and Zeiss are well aware of what that translation that just happened was. In other words, I'm just going to say it flat out, Z is a Desolate. And this is the first time the party is made aware of this fact. Now, Z basically threatens the group. Actually has a spell ready to go. Because, as you know, Desolates are horribly, maligned and hated and whatnot. And if you're also paying attention, there are two fairies, well, actually there's one fairy at the moment, in the party, and as such, they've never ousted Z as a Desolate. So Z is doing something to mask the fact that they are a Desolate. And having it revealed that Z is literally ready to kill the party if they have to, but it turns out they're cool with it, and they just like, we'll stay quiet, nothing's wrong, and so Z's like, okay, and puts the spell away, so to speak. So after sheer luck, they still managed to get out of there alive and intact somehow. Now, this whole session was very awesome for me. Not just the planning, but the execution. The whole prison break went very, very well. And one of the things I was most pleased by it is it probably sounds a little bit, now that I'm describing it to you, like I was handing them this victory, but I wasn't. Quite the contrary. Everything that went well either went well because of the dice or because they planned it and they executed it properly. So the party actually earned a true awesome victory and did a really good job of getting Zeiss out. Now, there was one other thing that I did kind of have planned to screw the party over, but ironically, the party also managed to negate that. I'll get to that in just a second. But I have a comment here, and I'm not sure why, but I mentioned that Zeiss was surprised, very surprised, by the fact that the group was willing to save him at all, because Zeiss has had an interesting character development over the course of the story. I know I haven't really got into it much. But overall, he started off as a money-grubbing assassin, and he actually quit the assassin group, the Bloodied Flock, and ended up, going with the group full-time, and has slowly been becoming less evil, is actually the best way I would put that. But he's still a money-grubbing bastard. That's actually the specific note I have here, so I just thought I'd share with that. They also learned that for Zeiss, 3 days' time has passed, although he doesn't share any of his experiences that happened to him in the prison, which I was actually role-playing with him, and therefore I will not share it with you, because that was his purview to keep it quiet to himself. But he was actually experiencing 3 days of role-playing, while the party has only experienced 1 day. Now, here's where things go wonky. As they're starting to celebrate, they mention to Bonebreaker what's happened, and Bonebreaker's eyes go wide because he's like, wait a minute. That was a destroyer? And they're like, yeah, but it's okay now. And he's like, no, it isn't, you idiots. And I mentioned that they have that perfect scanning ability. Did I also mention that the range on that is not insignificant? In other words, all they'd have to do now that their quarry has escaped, is send out another pulse, and then they would know exactly where they are, because it reaches far outside the city limits, because that's how it works. So, literally 8 minutes later, I rolled for this, by the way. 8 minutes later, the destroyer, they can hear the hum of the destroyer hovering overhead, through the ceiling and whatnot, and they're like, oh my god. And sure enough, almost a contingent, a full 32 troops comes in, along with a well-decorated and armored Lord Elf captain who comes in with them. Now, the party thinks this is over. This is up, the jig is up, and we're screwed, and this has all gone south. And that was admittedly kind of the plan from my end. Not to screw the party over, actually. I had all sorts of directions I wanted to go with this. But, if you'll recall, the group of Coulson, Hanuel, and Rory had managed to convince the Lady Lightmane to pardon the group. And again, I rolled for this. I want to stress that. So, that 8 minutes was significant because 3 minutes prior to that, he had received a private personal message from the Lady Lightmane herself, insisting that Zeiss was actually someone, lying through her teeth, of course, but he doesn't know this. Zeiss was actually someone who was working for her and for the Holtberg province as a special operative, and the whole the warmongering thing was a political affair that she will deal with in the future, but for now, he is to be treated as actual member of the military, just the same as any other special operations force would, and he is to be let go immediately and all charges dropped. And the same is true for the rest of the group, by the way. That is to say, the 3 that are still with them, because Hagaid is off doing his thing, and Kizrinthka's dead. And so the captain looks a little bit perturbed by this, and he says flat out that he doesn't believe the validity per se, but at the same time he admits that he can't see any way that they could actually have either forged or bribed the Lady of Holtberg herself in order to do this. So He, after straining for a minute and looking rather irritated, he lowers his head and says, I apologize, gives them a sincere apology for the inconvenience, and then he and his troops leave the Hidden Vale and get back on the destroyer and leave. And with that, the party is won! Da 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 da! Wait, why is that Indiana Jones music? There we go, Final Fantasy music. Da 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 da. And so, having accomplished all this, and again, this is mostly on the party and the dice. I didn't really hand them this victory. They successfully, they start the beginning of the exchange. They start working with the Lady of Heightmine, of Holtberg. They free Zeiss from prison, and they have managed to avoid all the horrible repercussions of all those acts, and ended up on top. So, bravo to the party. And that is the end of the day. After this, it's almost midnight, actually, and they're all like, okay, we're going to bed. And we'll discuss where things go next. God, an hour and 10. I figured that would be a while to get through this day. Not really surprising. So hopefully you enjoyed. And I will talk to you guys next time.